Okay, so we're live. I'm assuming people are out there can see us, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the panel. This is the Publish Your Research. Whoops, not yet. Thank you. It's tough talking into the void, you know. It says this live event will begin in a few moments. Okay, well, we'll just wait here until you give us the go ahead. Yeah, in here, but I think in Gather, it's being streamed into Gather. So that if you're in Gather, okay, we're ready to go. Great, we are live, wonderful. Welcome everyone to the panel. You're in the right place. This is the Publish Your Research at ICWSM panel. I'm gonna be your moderator today. I'm James Caverly. I'm a professor of computer science at Texas A&M University. And I'm really excited to introduce our two panelists. So we have Professor Afra Mashadi, who is one of our program chairs. Good morning or good evening, I guess, wherever you are.
Yeah, good evening. Here in Washington State, it's evening time. Thank you, James.
Beautiful. And we have our other panelist is one of our editors-in-chief of ICWSM from the Australian National University, where I think it's the afternoon, is Professor Lexing Shi. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hello from Canberra, Australia. It's 1 p.m. here and winter.
Okay, this is great. And so this is the second sort of version of this panel. So there was an instance of this panel we did for some of you yesterday and for me earlier today with a different editor-in-chief and a different program chair. And so that has been archived onto YouTube. Please check it out. They covered some of the same questions I think we'll cover in this panel, but also different ones, and you'll hear different perspectives. And so for those of you who have been to both of them, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to this one, welcome. And I got to do it again, but I do have a swag bag. This is from the 2008 version of the conference. I still have it. It's my tote bag from 2008. That's the second version of the conference. It's the first one that I went to. And so I'm really excited. I've seen this conference change a lot over the years. And so I'm hoping that this panel will be a good opportunity for those of you who are new to the community, trying to get a better sense of how to publish your research here. And for some of you like me who maybe have been around a longer time, but maybe haven't participated as much recently to kind of understand the current state of the conference. Okay, so let's get started. If you do have questions, please post them in the Gather chat or on the Slack channel. We have a volunteer who will take a look at those and we'll make sure that our panelists see them. Okay, enough about this. Let's get to our panelists. So I want to start things off. I asked the same question this morning, but one of you is an editor-in-chief, one is a PC chair. Could you kind of explain, what those different roles are, how they're different, and from the perspective of an author, what impact that might have on an author, the two different roles and kind of their significance?
Shall I make a start?
Go for it.
Right. I actually see Ingmar Weber on on the Gather attendee list. But basically, Ingmar recruited me to this EI0 as one of the first batch of editor-in-chiefs while ICWSM was transitioning from the typical conference mode, basically one round of review, your paper either gets in or not, to this journal mode with multiple submission rounds per year and also one chance to revise your paper incorporating comments. My high-level view of the EI0 that's different than the program chair is program chairs are sort of on a yearly rotating basis. Every year there is a different set of program chairs. And both the program chairs and the EICs are jointly responsible to essentially manage the call, manage and maintain the call for papers, managing the whole review process, including like maintain the pool of reviewers and make decisions, final decisions on papers based on the recommendation from SPC and the reviewer comments. The split, I guess, because the EIC is a 3-year rotating role, we have 4 right now. After this round, I will rotate off, and we have 3. So anything that's sort of have a longer time span falls into the EIC like task bucket. And then anything to do with that year's conference is more with the PC chairs. Yeah, there's finer distinctions. There has been like a split of how we generally manage the full papers, but the PC chair manages the poster and data set and demo papers. And on the full papers, we work closely together. So maybe I'll leave Afra to say how we work closely together.
Thank you, Lexing. Actually, it's difficult to add anything to that, except for that. I guess some points that you covered already is that the PC chairs are involved in that 1-year iteration of the conference. We kind of sit in between, I would say, editors-in-chiefs and the other organizing committee as well, like general chair and the virtual chair. So some of the other kind of works that we do in preparation of the conference is deciding on the program, what topics, what sessions should be, part of the program, what kind of papers should be grouped together, what sort of activities we can also talk about with the virtual chairs in terms of social gatherings or just conversations around the topics. So these all fall within program chairs. We do work heavily with the editors-in-chiefs throughout the year. And as Lexing was mentioning, actually, we do handle like papers together. We do make sure that, at least for the full papers, the regular papers, we work very closely together. The program committee also, the program chairs also oversee the data sets and the posters as well. So that's just in addition to what we do. Yeah.
Great. So great. And also just a reminder to our audience, I have a bunch of canned questions I'm happy to ask, but if you have your own question, again, throw them into the Gather chat or into the Slack channel. And I'll also make the point, which is, I know both of our panelists are happy to speak during this session now, but if you have any sort of questions you wanted to follow up with or kind of contact them directly, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that offline or in Gather. So also, or in Slack, I suppose. So you have many opportunities to engage with our panelist. Okay, so let me kind of turn it around and talk about kind of the scope of the conference. And I guess you're sort of seeing, both of you are seeing kind of a fairly, you're seeing all of the papers presumably that have been submitted, like a wide swath. Could you give our authors sort of a better understanding of, I don't want to, sort of, on one hand, kind of what a good paper looks like, but maybe some of kind of the common kind of pitfalls or, kind of issues that come up that you wish that, papers had dealt with better, that sort of come up that you see sort of often in the reviewing process to sort of make a better submission and to make a higher quality paper. And I'll throw this to Afra to kick things off.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, there's no like one winning magic solution that we can say. So it's very difficult. It really depends on the type of research that is being published. I would say that over years, I've seen ICWSM kind of, the trend of type of work that gets accepted and things that as reviewers and SPC we look for is type of works that not only present some sort of a qualitative or quantitative results, but they also reflect back on their research. So that means both in terms of what did they find out throughout their research and results, like what context does it work, and being frank about some of the limitation of what doesn't work and what is actually not part of this, as well as other kind of things such as, what were the, for example, ethical concerns that were taken into handling their data or into like doing a specific study. So I think these are the points that we see gets pointed by the senior program committee. And we also have been lucky to see that a lot of papers with these new models of revise and revision, when they go through these revisions, they come up like really excellent, addressing these kind of things into their discussions. And I let Lexing to add to that.
So I guess one stereotype that's in my head of a typical ICWSM paper, which there are many varieties, but I feel like a good ICWSM paper typically have like a certain type of newness in the problem, the method, and the results and observations. As for what exactly is new, like a lot of times, for example, for a lot of ICWSM papers, the problem itself is new, and framing the problem and grounding it, finding data sets to sort of address that problem is very new. But overall, I feel there is a balance of these three pillars, so to speak. And a great paper, you will see there will be like shining points in, at least I would say, often two of these pillars, or maybe all three, I think will be ideal. The community values problem a lot. So I have a computer science background, and I also publish like in like the web conference or wisdom kind of communities. So I say that, for example, a better recommender system for on the field archive data sets will probably not the typical good, like the best ICWSM paper. And a lot of the times reviewers and SPC question the problem articulation. I would say, and for example, some papers get an R&R because, oh, it seems to be a good paper, but what exact questions are being answered were not clear enough. Or sometimes papers get rejected because of that. In terms of method, I feel this conference probably has less of an expectation of here's a brand new, like, let's say model for, let's just say recommender systems, but new network metrics, new way to measure things, and new models and novel, basically uses of models that applies to the particularly socially relevant problem that we ask is great. And also results are very, very important, right? So the richness of results, the thoroughness of basically what the observation measures and how, like what it really, how it really ties back to the research question is very, very, very relevant. I would say there are two kinds of, I would want to mention two kinds of comments that I often see reviewers give. One is not sort of describing the approach thoroughly enough, all the way from data curation to how you generate a particular result. And some papers didn't actually make to the acceptance line because of this, because the data curation process is so sort of inherently messy and multi-stepped. The authors are highly recommended to document the process so that it can be reproduced. In terms of the methods, or sorry, the observations, as a computer science person, I resonate with reviewers' comments when they say your results are not properly grounded. And sometimes I get an email from the author back saying, what do you mean by grounded? Meaning, and sometimes us or the SPCs write back saying, this is roughly how, right? If you're asking a question about behavior, what else people have said about this kind of behavior already, not in the computer science literature, find some of them and discuss. So Afra mentioned ethics, I think that's very good. There will probably be separate discussions about that, either in this panel or other venues throughout the conference.
Yeah, I think, when you're starting to write a paper, it's a good idea is to read the most recent batch of papers in the conference. It's not, of course, going to cover every possible topic, but it can give you an idea of at least the kinds of methods and the kinds of kind of results and the kinds of questions that are being asked in the community. I think that's always a good starting point. So kind of related to that, so we've all written our best paper and we submit it, and darn it, it comes back rejected, not even an opportunity to revise and resubmit. So could you talk a little bit about kind of, this process of, the rejection rate and like where, let's call it the acceptance rate. Let me flip it around, and kind of where it lives. If your feeling is that the acceptance rate for either sort of straight accept or for revise and resubmit that ultimately is accepted, if you're kind of happy with where that is, if you feel like it needs to be even lower, or if the acceptance rate is going to go much higher, kind of give us a sense of sort of the state of that, the state of the community as it's growing, and opportunities to kind of shape the program moving forward. Take it, whoever wants it.
I'll make a start. So the complication for moving to the revise and resubmit mode is that there is no, like, that single number, the acceptance rate, is a bit complicated now. I'm happy to break it down a bit. I think Jason also showed this past year's statistics over different rounds. So over the past 3 years, like before the journal mode kicks in, my impression is that the acceptance rate is anywhere between 16 to 20%. Now the overall rate, which if we count the paper from initially being submitted and a final decision has been made, either accept or not accepted, or did not submit in R&R. So that acceptance rate is somewhere between 25 and 30%. So it has gone a bit higher. And over the different rounds, there's a bit of variation about how many papers, what fraction of papers gets an accept decision right away without going through revision. So that number has been quite low. I'm frank about that. So I've seen about anywhere between 9 to 11%, approximately, maybe 8 to 12. So I feel what this means is that the papers that get accepted right away are the ones that are really polished and articulate, well written, along like my personal 3 pillars, and sometimes others, other types. I would say the revision round certainly helped improve the quality of the submissions, and being able to have a dialogue with the reviewers at least once, I felt helped. Given there's like so much inherent noise in the review process, I would say I'm personally happy with where the statistics are there now, and I'm also happy with the vast majority of reviews that I've read, and sometimes even pleasantly surprised or impressed by them.
Those numbers are actually I'm happy to hear those numbers. Those seem kind of in line with, or, a little more kind of optimistic than some other venues these days. So that's good to hear. Afra, you're welcome to chime in, or I can fire off other questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's true, like that, it's rarely papers get accepted in their first submission. So if you are an author and you receive a revise and resubmission, don't take that like badly, in a sense. That is like quite an opportunity. I think that is something that, at least as a researcher myself, I really realized that how much it can help to actually frame your work for an audience that is going to be looking at it in that year of the conference. So definitely it's very useful comments from the SPC. And we also don't take, I think this topic would come up later, but we don't take reviews lightly. So we make sure that the roadmap that is given for example, the revise and resubmit is quite thorough, that the authors can take that and actually understand what they need to do for their revisions.
Great, we have our first audience question. And folks, just as a reminder, you can post your questions in Gather or on our Slack channel, and we'll take a look at them. The question is from a first-time attendee, and it's essentially, how do you get going as a researcher? What are the best steps we should be taking from wow, this is a cool conference, the topics are pretty interesting, to kind of taking those next steps into being, building your research platform. So any advice you would have for our new attendees?
I go first. So I see the question is asking specifically like for stepping into academia, so career in academia. I think one thing that can help with if you're like early on in your, research career and you are basically starting publishing in these venues, one thing that is really valuable is to be on the other side of the publishing table. So if you can serve as a reviewer for conferences such as ICWSM, and you're both like doing a good for community, but also you get to see how the papers are assessed and what kind of like papers are submitted at every round. And we are always looking for good reviewers to be added to ICWSM. And I think certainly in my career path, that has helped a lot to just know that what is it that like my research needs to have. It could be sometimes about the methods that you learn from like reading so many papers and reviewing them and so on, and also just knowing what are the like the ways to actually like present your research. And I think that's my take on some of the, I mean, there are obviously so many things you can do to get your research going, but I would say that in addition to working on your research and publishing it, being part of the community service is definitely very rewarding.
Maybe let me add to that by saying that, yeah, so it can be hard to get into a reviewer pool if you don't have experience or cannot shadow someone. Well, the best thing is to shadow a senior person and go through a review process with them, right? For example, they give you one paper that you write a review and then you discuss it. And then you have maybe asked to have visibility on the other reviewers as well. Other than this, I would say, of course, read lots of papers in this area and prepare to sort of get feedback and fail many times. This is, I guess, what we haven't said about rejection is that rejection is the norm. Don't get disheartened by rejection. Yes. If you or your like collaborators firmly believe in the work, make it better and resubmit. And yeah, I will sound selfish for ICWSM. There are 3 rounds per year, but in case that doesn't work for you, there are also other conferences that will take similar kinds of work, right?
Yeah, those are great. Those are great answers. I would just add, always seek out mentorship. It could be whatever institution you're coming from. It could be, like our panelist mentions, from your engagement in this conference, for example. It's finding mentors and people that you can talk about your work with and get feedback from is always helpful. So that feedback before you've ever even thought about submitting, to really get your work and make sure you're asking the right question and things like that can be really, really valuable. But that takes a little effort and it can be hard sometimes, but very, very important. Okay, cool. So, and by the way, our panelists, if you have questions you want to ask each other, please do, but I'm going to keep rattling them off until you stop me. So, okay, we have another question that has come up, which is about conflicts of interest. And so, I could imagine, I'm just going to pick something out of a hat. Microsoft had so many papers in the conference. Is there a possibility that somehow that there can be a conflict of interest that the conference is not taking care of, or for example, if one of you were to submit a paper, I'm assuming that you don't actually have any insight into its progress through the review process. So could you kind of help our audience understand kind of conflicts and like if there are kind of cliques of people who are sort of reviewing each other, if that's a possibility, or things that the conference is doing to fight against that? So Afra, I think it's being directed towards you for now.
Is it being directed towards me? Okay, yes. So I can reassure you that we are very thorough with that. So before any submissions come, all the editors-in-chief and program committee, we must declare our conflict of interest, obviously. And the good thing about the conference system is that we don't even get to see that somebody that has a conflict of interest with us has submitted something. So we don't even know of that. And in terms of the handling of that, obviously, because there's so many of us, in a sense, there's 4 editors-in-chiefs, and this year there were 3 program chairs. We always make sure that basically the paper that could be a conflict of interest is completely handled by different editors-in-chiefs and so on. So this is in terms of the us just being able to even look at the papers and so on. Now, in terms of the review process, again, the same thing happens. So when the senior program committee are selected, we make sure that the people who are assigned to that paper are not, they don't know the authors, they don't have a conflict of interest with that author, right? So I think one thing that could be observed, and especially if you're kind of maybe first time in this conference or second time in this conference and so on, is that you might think, oh, I attended a session and it happened that like there were so many of papers from University of X, how is that possible? And actually it just happens that some of the research groups that work on the domains of, social computing and type of research they do that fits in ICWSM, there are large groups. And you can imagine like during a year, they might be submitting like so many papers that some of them have got accepted to this conference and many of them have also got rejected. It doesn't mean that they didn't get any rejection. As a program chair, I put my hand up and I say I had my fair round of rejections from ICWSM, actually. And you can even see that in my past years of lack of ICWSM publication. So it's definitely something that conflict of interest is definitely something that is taken very seriously. And Lexin can actually give her perspective of years of serving in the EIC.
Thanks, Afra. I just wanted to add to that in particular in PCS, the way conflict of interest is handled is that when we see the pool of papers, we each go through the entire pool, the chairs, and then declare a conflict on that paper. Once you declare a conflict, it cannot be removed unless you email the maintenance of that site. And that paper, the information of that paper is completely hidden up until the time we're collecting the final decision of. So basically, by the time of this conference happens, I would know whether, for example, my paper is accepted or not slightly before the email went out, but I wouldn't be able to see reviews or discussions. And in terms of deciding on papers, so for the past year or so, the PC chairs and EICs, we formed pairs. So basically, Afra and I happen to be a pair that's in workable time zones. And then we have handled lots of conflicts of interest papers from other chairs of either their institution or their recent collaborators. And when we have a question about the decision of that paper, we will have an email discussion sort of outside of our normal mailing list without them, maybe just the 2 of us with the SPC or sometimes with a reviewer and so on.
Great.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think I dropped mentioning that the reviewers don't get to see the authors of the papers, obviously. So as you know, it's a double-blind process. So for us editors-in-chief and program chairs, we know who has submitted a paper. We get to see the author information, but the reviewers do not also know the institution that the paper came from. So it's completely blind from their perspective, which helps also in terms of if the concern is that a specific institution might just get their papers in just because of the kind of ranking they have, or a company, let's say the Microsoft example, that doesn't actually happen just because of the anonymity side of things as well.
And
Great. Yeah,
right,
go ahead.
sorry, just to who has visibility on what. SPCs have visibility on who the author is. So sometimes they say, well, this is actually a conflict for me, and then we reassign it. And if the reviewer has doubts, they can always sort of contact SPCs or us to get reassigned, saying, well, I don't know who this is, but it might look too similar.
Yeah, in all of my experiences with the conference, it's all of these issues are taken very seriously, and you know, everyone I've engaged with, you know, we're thinking on behalf of the community and the, you know, the research, and you know, and trying to get away from these kinds of issues. So those are really great answers, and I hope it gives some confidence to our community. So we talked a little bit about you know, sort of this question earlier about kind of, you know, building your research portfolio, but I'm also thinking for our newer attendees or, you know, newer researchers, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, sort of opportunities for them to engage with the community. For example, how do you know, if it's my first time attending and I'm a, you know, first or second year PhD student, for example, how do I get more involved with a conference like this? And like, what are some very like concrete steps I can take to get more involved?
I'll start with one suggestion. Volunteer for the conference and meet other students or new researchers in your shoes.
And so if I want to volunteer, what do I need to do for that?
There was
Like
a call for volunteers. Yeah. Well, have a look at the conference website, see if there's a designated chair in charge of volunteering, and watch out for the like Twitter feeds for call for volunteering. For example, if people are listening now on live, Josh Noon on this the attendees list is the student volunteer helping with this session. Have a chat with him. And he's a first year research student, Master of Philosophy student in my lab.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think volunteer for conference is great. I think other things you can do, like now, as opposed to like for another year waiting, is that really like make most of the conference. Is hard to say because we are virtual. So obviously it's a little bit more difficult than just like, you know, running into someone and so on. But at the same time, it means that we have really like global audience from across the world, and you know, you can even perhaps have more time to discuss something with them because they are working from the comfort of their computer. So try to attend the all sorts of programs, you know, the gathering that is part of the conference, and really try to mingle and talk to people about what your research is, and try to, you know, make sure that you have contacts from people that you can like later on pass your results to them and see if you can get some early feedbacks.
Yeah, and you know, it's been a tough year with COVID, and of course we're all doing this virtually. And I really want to recognize the organizers of this conference. It seems with the Slack and Gather and everything, I've been very, very impressed. So yeah, I think you have to take the best chances that you can to connect with people. And the other thing is, especially for a first-time attendee, you know, I can remember being very nervous. You know, I can't go talk to this is the PC chair. I could never talk to the PC chair. They're nice people, and you know, if you don't want to talk to the PC chair directly, you know, talk to a student volunteer. After an author gives a talk that you thought was really interesting, talk to the speaker. Go talk to that speaker. You know, find them in the coffee session and ask them about their paper. That's such a you know, the speaker's 99 times out of 100, that speaker is going to feel really good. You come to talk to me about my paper? You liked it? Okay, so that's a great way to begin to build those connections, especially if you're, you know, if you're not as comfortable talking to people, or, you know, that's an easy thing to do. Say, hey, I really liked your talk. Can you tell me about X? And right there, now you're making, you're learning about someone and building those relationships, which can be so valuable.
Yeah, and just to add to that, of course, anytime you see me on that, I usually run around that gather town. I really like my character. Come and talk to me. I've been trying to find someone to talk to. So if you're like, thinking, oh my God, she would not talk to us, please do talk to me on that platform. And again, we are all human. I spend most of my time with my students in the lab, and we are used to the virtual platforms that we have these days. So yes, definitely seek us out. And usually with this time zone, you would see me online in the evenings as well. So that's a good time.
Okay, we have a question from our Slack, which I'll read the question out, and I think we can interpret this a couple of ways, but it's basically, what kind of data sets should I submit in ICWSM? And so I think I can interpret that as sort of as a data set submission is one question. What are those data sets? And then also, I think we can also interpret it as, what are the kinds of data sets I should be using it in my sort of research paper submissions? So if you have any thoughts to share about that.
The first interpretation of the question is a little bit difficult to answer, at least from my side. I did not really serve as a dataset chair, so I'm not sure on the specific things that they have looked for in this year and in the past years. The second part, I think it really depends on what kind of research question you're asking. So I mean, we see a variety of different works with really a range of different data sets that that can be used for, if you have a research question and you have a data set that can be used to answer that research question, I think that's how you should be looking at that, as opposed to what data set should we kind of gather, and then what questions should we ask on that data. And I want to give an example of that, especially with our social science track. We do see more focal point in, understanding a specific social phenomenon, and then what kind of data sets could be used to answer that question. So that's just my interpretation of this question. Yeah.
I'm going to try and have a general statement about both versions of James's question. I feel the honor is on the authors to argue, or first convince themselves, and then convince the rest of the viewers and the larger community who would care. Why is this data set important? And potentially how, what value would your work in curating the data set and gathering it? Sometimes gathering a data set is very difficult, right, itself, and doing so is important. And then what kind of social problems, the social science problems you might help answer besides the ones you might have already answered? For example, the Reddit dataset have enabled lots of people to do interesting things on lots of different topics in the past few years, right? And there's a few groups working on, for example, 4chan or other internet channels that the data disappears after a while. So there is a value for certainly having those, in an archive form so that other people can study and reproduce the work. And then there's lots of value in curating specific data sets for a purpose. Like in recent years, there are a number of papers on crowdfunding or things like that, where for some good ICWSM paper, data set is sort of figure out the question in the data set is more than half the work, right?
And then there's sort of a related question which comes up in terms of the data sets we use in our research papers, which is always, is there enough data? And the joke I always say, it's like, I have a 10,000 X, they say, why not 100,000? I have 1 million, you say, why not 1 billion? It's always more. Is there a right sort of size to the data set? Is there too small of a size of a data set that we should be, using in our research that we submit?
I wouldn't say there's a specific size of the data set. Again, this is really depending on the question that is is being posed and we want to answer. So I think methodologically, obviously, it's harder to make observations on very small data sets, and that's true for many different kind of questions that can be asked. Obviously, there are questions that there are data that kind of it's difficult to get hold of, even like in larger scale. There could be some social science information, like some data that could answer like some social science questions, but it might not be even possible to collect that data in larger scale. So it's very context dependent, I would have to say. I think obviously the reviewers, the SPC and the reviewers take that into account of like what you're trying, what are the claims you're making. Okay, so if you're making some sort of very like generalizable claims, then you want to make sure that you have the data to support it, right? So I would say that there's no straightforward like formula, at least in terms of the works that I've seen. And I know that sometimes, revise and resubmissions ask for, doing something differently or gathering more data, but there is always a rationale behind why that was asked of the authors to do. So there must have been some really gap there that the reviewers have picked, and for that reason maybe they've required extra additional data or additional comparisons, for example, with different type of data. I let Lexing to go.
Thanks. I echo Afra's sentiment. I feel in the sense that right now sort of having lots of data is usually not the foremost challenge, but it's the representativeness of the data and justifying that the data is fit for the purpose that the problem that I'm studying is hard. The burden is on the authors to argue that the data is as representative as it can be for the population or the phenomena that we're studying, and also tell the readers what kind of potential bias can be in there, because the process of sampling the data, usually it's not completely independent of some outcome. The one typical example is the election. People who don't vote is not independent of the who they vote for, especially in America. And it's good to conduct ablation studies if the size of the data set is one of the key questions, right? So it might be hard to conduct ablation studies sort of larger than your current data set size, but you can certainly scale it one order of magnitude down and see if the conclusion changes. Right, and then, yes, and I guess, so if there are data sets that are, I would say there's, again, some specific aspect of that is particularly difficult. For example, collecting several samples over a long period of time, where long means like several months apart or even several years apart. It's certainly taken into account by the reviewers, and reviewers often appreciate the effort of doing so.
Great. We have a question from Gather, and this is a process question, which I think is a nice segue and an important topic. So, so a paper is submitted. I'm assuming an SPC gets it. Can you kind of walk us through how the SPC identifies the reviewers? The reviews come in. What decision-making takes place then? Is there a discussion? Does the SPC just unilaterally make a decision? Is there a follow-on discussion with the program chair? Kind of help demystify that process for us.
Yes. So once the reviewers are submitted for the paper, for all the papers, basically the discussion phase starts, where the SPC would and all the reviewers would read each other's reviews, and there would be a discussion between them. If there is a really disparity between the kind of ratings they have done, for example, some loved it, some other reviewers really ranked it down. There would be really thorough discussions between the reviewers, and they would have to basically talk to each other, well, in virtual world or like in the written form, to acknowledge that they have seen each other's point of view, and whether the concerns are, for example, to make a paper go down in terms of the ranking or go higher, they're not so much of a concern. So this process happens, and obviously as EIC and PCs, we oversee this process. So if, for example, for any reason we see that there is not enough discussion with some of the papers, and these papers require discussion, we go through this like high peak period of a lot of like activities we need to do for handling these papers, and we basically just make sure that the SPC creates more conversation between the discussions. Once that's done, I guess usually the reviewers and the SPC would come to some sort of a roadmap understanding of, let's say, for example, if it is to be revised and resubmitted, the SPC would take all of those feedbacks from the discussions that are not visible to the authors and in the PCS platform, and as well as the reviews, and would write a roadmap of what should be done for this paper to get in. As EIC and PC chairs, we read every single roadmap, and we make sure that that is a clear thing to the authors, and they would understand what they need to do. If we see the roadmap is general, like we don't usually see these things, but let's say for sake of example, if there is a roadmap that says add more citations, that would not be the case, but then we would actually go back to the SPC and ask that for them to clarify what is the specific thing they want to do, they want the authors to do. And so we do work in pairs, as Lexing was saying. So we oversee quite a large number of papers and their reviews and their meta reviews. And once the meta review is sent back to the authors, they would have an opportunity to basically improve it. We also do say to the authors that they could, if something is not clear to them for any reason, they could still like reach out to us as PC, and we would kind of clarify that with the SPC, and we make sure that the meta review would be clear to them. So this is for the ones that are getting like revise and resubmit ranking. And I let Lexing to talk about maybe the other ones that go like above and get an accept, or the ones that go below and get a reject.
Yeah, thanks for the summary. I would say that we expect the meta review to justify the decision, right? Even, right. So for a reject, the SPC would have written something as the main rationale they see as being like sustaining that decision, usually extracted or summarized from the reviews. For the accept, so also for both, like for paper receiving any decision, as the meta review is, or each review was first contain a succinct summary of the paper as the reviewer understand it. And sometimes some of those gets extracted or summarized by the SPCs. For example, this paper, the problem domain is really interesting, but it's really like, this is my paraphrasing of hypothetical reject, right? But the question is not well articulated, and many of the measurement steps are not clearly described. Therefore, it looks like it's not ready, right? Right. So something like that without, when it's muddy from the beginning, then it's hard for people to, or reviewers to assess the results. Then does look like it would not be an accept. So that's kind of a like line of reason we would like to see from the meta review. And if there is a consensus among the reviewers, as PC chairs or EICs, we usually don't go back and read every single review in that case. But if there is a discrepancy and discussion don't resolve it, we sometimes also go do that and read the paper ourselves sometimes. So I would say the majority of the decision is recommended by the SPC and endorsed by us. I have also had cases where I did not agree with the SPC, and in that case, I would be emailing the SPC before the announcement and say, right, here's why I didn't agree. Do we change or not? And we have a discussion and reach a consensus.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I know some of our audience members, you may have experiences in other conferences where you have frontline reviews and then you turn the crank and that turns into acceptances and rejects. My take on ICWSM really is a lot of effort is taken to really work with the reviewers, the SPC, and then the EIC and the PC chairs to really kind of come to a consensus decision. Great. Okay. We have another question. This was actually asked in the earlier panel, but it's connected to what we're talking about right now. And it's about the revise and resubmit, the R&Rs. And so Afra, you mentioned, right, that the SPC and after being reviewed by y'all is going to give a roadmap of, what the authors need to do. Could you talk a little bit about some of the practicalities? It's like, is there a special template that the author should follow? Like, what's the best way to kind of respond? And, do I need to do everything that's in the roadmap? Do I still have a chance to be accepted if I don't do it all? Kind of the practicalities of doing the R&R.
Yeah, so every meta review that is sent to the authors, especially the ones with the R&R, with the roadmap, it should be very clear understanding of like what was the concern of those reviewers. So obviously you can think about this in terms of the priority of the things that you need to do. So I would say that obviously the paper, when it's resubmitted again, it goes to the same SPC and the same reviewers. So if they've asked you to do something and you haven't done it, so pretty much it's going to be like, well, we asked the authors to, tackle this concern and they have not done it. So it would not really be a good thing for you. So I think, and it comes with like, so obviously there are like different number of things that could be there in terms of the concerns, but most of the time they are not like tiny little things like grammar or typo. Those could be even corrected in camera ready version. They're mostly focused with what you really need to tackle to get your work published in ICWSM. Okay, and I think in terms of communication and like, is there a specific format and so on? First of all, if this is your first time and you're thinking of submitting to ICWSM, don't be surprised if when you get an R&R and you resubmit your paper, your second resubmission would look very different from your initial submission. That's the point, that you probably worked so much on it and improving and tackling those concerns that your paper might even like look different to you. But in terms of communication, I really encourage authors to don't try to hide. Don't try to say that, like, kind of pretend that you didn't see some of the concerns and so on in the letter that you're writing and what you've done and what you haven't done. And, you're a researcher. If you think that there was something that you don't agree with, obviously you can stand your ground and you say why you didn't do it and why you don't agree with that comment. Maybe there was something that was overseen. Obviously it is your paper, right? So as a researcher, it's your way of communicating on taking feedback, reflecting on that feedback, and also I would say any good researcher knows that when you get your reviews, don't start working on it like your letter to the reviewers the next day, okay? Drop your emotions and feelings, let it settle down, think about what you need to do to improve your work, come back to those reviews, reflect back on those. And I would have to say, like, I think best thing is that really take a fair judgment hat on what you have done to improve and tackle those concerns and what you haven't done. For example, my own personal experience, so not really from being a program chair, but from last year ICWSM, which I have a paper in that is in this round, is actually presented tomorrow. We were asked to do more interviews, like in the parks, because my paper is to do with the parks and visitation. And then COVID hit, okay? So nobody knew that is going to happen. So any kind of like a real face-to-face interview just became impossible. Like it was really out of our hands. So we couldn't really like gather more data, qualitative data to make a fair comparison and things like that. So really being frank with what you didn't do and why you didn't do it, I think that's like something that is appreciated by the reviewers. And obviously, that's not saying that that's going to work for everything. Obviously, if you're told that you have a methodological flow, or you have to compare your work with another work, and you just decide, hey, I'm not going to do it because I don't have time. Well, that's not really going to work either. So yeah, that's just my feedback, both personal and looking from the PC chair.
Yeah, if I might add, so I guess in the abstract, I feel because this the response document, well, mechanically, I recommend like quoting or re-summarizing the reviews and like responding to them, right? I guess this is part of what the question asks. I believe CSCW has a template that people can use but don't have to. And I feel for ICWSM, we don't have a template. So basically whichever form you see fit, and there is no page limit. Of course, don't write a 100-page response. Just be mindful of reviewers' time as well. I feel the two difficult things is that because reviewers, some other people looking at your work, right? So I definitely recommend getting feedback and getting like your collaborators or your colleagues feedback about how some of what some of the responses are. The typical uncertainty is where this work ends. Yeah, what is the quantization unit for this piece of research work? As Afra mentioned, then sometimes you say, oh, I could have done this additional bit and it's nice, but without it, the burden is again on the authors to argue that without some additional bit, this work is still significant and people should care. And you can promise to do that in future work, or say you're already working on it as your next paper.
Yeah, those are great responses. And if I could just add, anything you can do to make the life of your reviewers easier is always appreciated. So, you can color code your changes. If there's 5 things that the reviewers have asked you to do, bullet point them, the 5 things that you did, because it's your research, it's your kind of special project that you've invested a lot of time in. But for the reviewer, they maybe haven't thought about your project for the 3 or 4 months or the 6 months before you resubmitted it. So you have to kind of refresh them. Okay, this is what the issues are, to make their life a little bit easier. But I think the community is quite open. So you could use a table, you could use bulleted list, it's fine. But just make sure that you clearly address all of the points that are asked. We're down to our last 2 minutes, and I know that the spotlight session is going to start at the top of the hour. So just to sort of this last moment, if we have any last thoughts, but before, I just want to say thank you to both of our panelists. I really appreciate all of your time and your insights, and I really want to thank all of our audience members for joining us now, and hope you've learned something. And I hope, again, if you have additional questions about how to publish your research at ICWSM, of course, please feel free to reach out to any of us and any of the panelists also from earlier today or yesterday, depending on your time zone. But with that, do our panelists have any final words in our last, let's say, 30 seconds here?
Oh, I'm just saying I'm going to be hanging out in Gather Town for a bit today and tomorrow, roughly the same time slots until I guess 2 hours from now. And I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, same here actually. I'm just standing, I think, by the garden next to the water. So come and just like have a chat if you feel like yeah, having a conversation. I'll be there for another like half an hour or so. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank everybody for joining us today, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.